Now I want to talk about the monetary policy tools used by the Federal Reserve System, which is the central bank of the United States. So here, on the homepage of the Federal Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, right? I just clicked monetary policy. Monetary policy in the United States comprises the Federal Reserve's actions and communication to promote maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. Three economic goals the Congress has instructed the Federal Reserve to pursue. So why monetary policy are very important? Why those policies set by these folks, the Federal Open Market Committee? Remember from my previous video, this committee called FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee, right? This committee should involve 12 voting members. 7 members are reserved for these folks. Board of Governors, right? Board members. 7 seats are reserved for board members, but now we only have 5 board members. 2 more should be nominated by the White House, the president. So since there's supposed to be 12 seats, right? 7 are reserved for board members, 5 remaining seats. 1 seat is always reserved for the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And the remaining 4 seats, right, are assigned on a rotating basis among the remaining 11 regional bank presidents. So periodically, those folks, right, they meet in Washington, D.C. at the Federal Reserve Board, right? They discuss current events related to economic growth, economic situation, right? And then they make important monetary policy decisions to either increase or decrease money supply to make sure unemployment rate will be low, right? Prices are stable. You have to set a monetary policy or you have to regulate the money supply in a smart way because you don't want to be in this kind of situation. This morning you wake up, right? You know, suppose you drink Coke, the price for each can of Coke is $1. And you don't want tomorrow morning you wake up, the price for each can of Coke rises to $100 per can, right? And the day after tomorrow, its price rises to $1 trillion per can, right? That would be disaster. So monetary policy is set to promote maximum employment, stable prices. Central bank wants to make sure prices are stable in general. Okay, so what are so-called monetary policy tools? There are several tools. So what are those tools to regulate money supply in the United States? To either increase or decrease money supply. So there are several tools. The first and the most important tool is called open market operations. Open market operations are conducted by the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee. This is the most important and frequently used monetary policy tool. Here, about the FOMC, right? So there are several monetary policy tools. So we are talking about so-called open market operations. Let me open this one. So what are open market operations, OMOs? What are open market operations? Essentially, that's a decision. So the Federal Open Market Committee, they decide whether or not they are going to print new money and then to use that newly printed money, right, to buy U.S. federal government bonds. And if you are not familiar with the term bond, right, you should go back to review those set of videos on bond or introduction to the bond market. Okay, so open market operations, OMOs, right? So for example, if those folks, the Federal Open Market Committee guys, right? They get together and they meet. If they want to increase money supply, so for example, let's print $5 trillion US, right, cash, and let's dump $5 trillion cash through the economy, right? If they think this is useful, how would they increase money supply by $5 trillion US? So for example, what's open market operations, right? So the Federal Open Market Committee, FOMC, are going to buy bonds from the general public. If the Federal Reserve, right, buys bonds from the general public, remember the price for bond is not free, right? The price, if you want to buy a bond, you have to pay. So for example, $1,000, $2,000, right, to buy one piece of paper called a bond, right? So the Federal Reserve, the central bank. So this is not precise, but it gives you the basic idea what open market operations are. Essentially, it's buying and selling bonds by the Federal Reserve, by the central bank. So if increase money supply, the central bank, for example, let's just print $5 trillion cash, right? And then I'm going to use those $5 trillion cash to buy bonds from the general public. In this process, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, grabs bonds from the general public, right? In return, the general public is going to receive $5 trillion US, right? Just printed by the Federal Reserve, by the central bank. So in this case, if the Federal Reserve buys bonds from the general public, right? This is going to lead to a what? Increase in money supply. So in a not very accurate way to describe this situation, so let's print new money, then use them to buy bonds. So that's why you see whenever the Federal Reserve, the central bank, decides to buy bonds from the general public, right? This is going to lead to an increase in money supply. This is one example of open market operations. And in other cases, right, the central bank may need to decrease money supply. So for example, there's too much cash available in the market. So let's take away $5 trillion from the economy, right? Because of too much cash available. Inflation rate is way too high. Money is getting worthless, right? Let's take away $5 trillion from the general public. So in this case, the central bank wants to decrease money supply by $5 trillion US, right? How to decrease money supply? How to take away $5 trillion from the general public? This is usually done by open market operations. So let's just do the opposite from the previous case. So in this case, if the central bank wants to decrease money supply, right, then the central bank is going to sell bonds it holds back to the general public. And this is going to lead to the decrease in money supply. Why? In a not very accurate way to describe this, I grab the central bank, the Fed, grabs money away from the general public by giving them bonds, right? So whenever the central bank wants to decrease money supply, right, the central bank can conduct a particular type of open market operation called selling bonds back to the general public to decrease money supply. If the central bank wants to increase money supply, right, the central bank can buy bonds from the general public. That means central bank, let's print the money first. then use the money I just printed from my computer to buy, from my printer to buy bonds from the general public. In this process, newly printed money or new money, right, is injected into the general economy for circulation. So they are typical examples of so-called open market operations. This tool, this monetary policy tool, right, is the most important and frequently used by the Federal Reserve System called open market operation by either buying or selling bonds in the bond market. Who actually carries out trading bonds on behalf of the Federal Reserve System? The Federal Reserve Bank at New York City. The Federal Reserve Bank at New York City, right, actually carries out bond trades on behalf of the Federal Reserve System. So that's why the Federal Reserve Bank at New York City, right, is the most important among all 12 regional banks, because it's the Federal Reserve Bank at New York City actually carries out those buying and selling bonds in the bond market in New York City on behalf of the Federal Reserve System, right, to either increase or decrease money supply. So this is the most important and the frequently used tool by the Federal Reserve. It's called open market operation, essentially buying and selling bonds. To increase money supply, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is going to buy bonds. To decrease money supply, the central bank or the Federal Reserve is going to sell bonds back to the general public. There are some other monetary policy tools, right, used by the central bank. The second tool is called the discount rate. Remember, the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, right, is the boss of all regional banks. So what's discount rate? So for example, at the District 11, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas oversees all commercial banks in District 11. So basically all commercial banks in Texas, part of New Mexico, and part of Louisiana, right? So if a Chase Bank in Texas, right? So if you are the manager of like a Chase Bank local branch, right? You want to make sure there are always enough cash available in your ATMs so your customers can withdraw cash from your ATM machines anytime they want, right? So it would be terrible if once your customers come to your ATM, either drive by or in person, right? And there's no cash left in the ATM. Your customer may be pissed off in that type of situations, right? So you have to make sure there are always enough cash available to meet your customers' withdrawal demands at your ATM machines. But for a regional commercial bank, like a local Chase Bank branch, right, it could be the case the local commercial bank may not have enough cash available to meet consumer withdrawal demands, right? What should the local commercial bank do in such a situation? The local commercial bank can borrow money. To be more precise, to borrow cash from its boss, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So a local commercial bank, Chase Bank, can borrow money from the local regional Federal Reserve Bank. So this Chase Bank manager, right, is going to probably, in a not very precise way, this guy is flying to Dallas, right, and This guy goes to the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. This guy goes to a particular department called the discount window. That's the service department, right? Dealing with this type of situation. And Chase Bank may need to borrow $2 million cash from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, right? And since there's no free lunch, just like if you want to get a personal loan, you want to get auto loan, you want to get a mortgage from your local commercial bank, right? You have to pay interest back to the bank, which offer this loan to you, right? So if Chase Bank wants to borrow money from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, right? The local commercial bank, like Chase Bank, has to pay interest for the money it borrowed from the Federal Reserve Bank. And this particular interest rate is called the discount rate. So for example, if a local Chase Bank borrows $2 million from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, right? For 1 year. And the local Chase Bank has to pay how much money as the interest payment? $2 million, right? Times 2%. That's the interest payment. So there's no free lunch. So if the local commercial bank wants to borrow money from its regional Federal Reserve Bank, right? The local commercial bank also needs to pay interest. That interest rate is called the discount rate. If the central bank wants to increase money supply, so the central bank can drop or can lower the discount rate. So for example, if a central bank wants to encourage regional commercial banks, right, to borrow more money from the central bank can drop or lower discount rate to 1%. And this is good news to the borrowing bank, the local Chase Bank. Why? Because before, the local Chase Bank had to pay 2% discount rate, interest rate, right, per year for borrowing money from the regional Federal Reserve Bank. Now, the interest rate, which is called the discount rate here, is lower, 1%. That means it is cheaper now for Chase Bank to borrow money, to borrow cash from its regional Federal Reserve Bank, right? So in this case, the local bank may have the incentive to borrow more money, more cash from the regional Federal Reserve Bank. This is going to lead to the increase in money supply. So by lowering discount rate, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is going to increase money supply. So that is the second tool which can be used by the central bank, the Federal Reserve, right, to control money supply. It's called a discount rate. So discount rate is just a special type of interest rate. It is the interest rate the borrowing commercial bank needs to pay the central bank for the cash it borrows. Okay. Another tool is called a reserve requirement. Local commercial banks are regulated by its regional central bank. So all commercial banks in Texas are regulated by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, right? So reserve requirement can be illustrated by the so-called reserve ratio. Suppose the reserve ratio is 10%, right? By regulation, the reserve ratio is 10%. That means if a local commercial bank, Chase Bank, takes in $100, right, from a newly opened saving account. If a local commercial bank takes in $100 from newly opened saving account from its customers, right? So a commercial bank makes money by what? By sending out loans, right? By loaning money it takes to borrowers, right? So for example, if you want to buy a house, right, you can get a mortgage loan from a local Chase bank. So what is reserve requirement? What is reserve ratio? If Chase bank takes in $100, right, Chase bank cannot lend this $100. It just takes from a new customer. So if the reserve ratio is 10%, that means this Chase bank has to keep at least 10% out of $100, which is $10 in its so-called vault. So that means if the Chase bank, right, takes in $100 from a newly opened savings account, Chase bank can only loan out at the most $90 to borrowers, people who need to borrow money to buy new car, new house, or other stuff. Chase bank has to keep at least $10 for every $100 deposit it takes, right, in its vault. Why? Because why people open checking saving accounts, right? They may need to withdraw money any minute, any moment they want, right? So through reserve requirement or reserve ratio, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, wants to make sure local commercial banks, they have enough cash available to meet customers' ATM or cash withdrawal demands, right? Your customer go to your ATM, right? They have to make sure, the central bank wants to make sure those local commercial banks' customers, right, they can withdraw any amount of cash they wish from their local ATMs. If the central bank wants to increase money supply, the central bank can lower the reserve ratio to increase money supply. If the central bank lowers the reserve ratio to 5%, that means for the same $100 Chase Bank just takes from a newly opened savings account, right? Now Chase Bank can loan out at the most $95 for people who need to borrow money to buy a new car or new house, right? So in this case, lower reserve ratio leads to an increase in money supply. This is another tool which can be used by the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. But among these monetary policy tools, right, open market operations, discount rate, reserve requirements, and other policy tools, so-called federal funds rate, right? Which one is the most important? It is the open market operations. OMOs are the most important and the most frequently used tools by the Federal Reserve Bank to conduct monetary policies. Discount rate, reserve requirements, even though they are monetary policy tools, right? They can be used to either increase or decrease money supply, but they are rarely used by the central bank. So instead, open market operations, right? This is the most important monetary policy tool used by the central bank in the United States.